I'm Chloe, 67 years young, and there's something you should know about me. I've always had strong intuition. Call it a sixth sense or mother's instinct, but that day on the winding mountain road to Vermont, it hit me like never before. My heart raced as overwhelming dread washed over me. "Stop the car. Now," I told my husband Frank. He questioned me with his eyes, but something in my voice made him listen. "Before I tell you what happened next, tell me where you're watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to hear how following my instincts that day saved our lives." Frank and I have been married for 43 wonderful years. We've built a beautiful life together, raised 3 amazing children, and now enjoy spoiling our 6 grandchildren whenever we get the chance. Throughout our decades together, Frank has been my rock, my best friend, and the love of my life. He's the practical one, always thinking things through logically, while I tend to follow my heart and trust my feelings. Somehow, this balance has worked for us all these years. One tradition our family holds dear is our annual reunion in Vermont. Frank's family owns a beautiful cabin nestled in the mountains passed down through generations. Every summer, the entire extended family gathers there for a week of reconnecting, reminiscing, and creating new memories. Cousins, aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, and grandparents, all under one roof, plus the overflow staying at nearby cabins and hotels. This particular summer was extra special. It marked the 50th wedding anniversary of Frank's parents, Harold and Betty. At 80 and 78, they were still going strong, though Harold had some health issues in recent years. This milestone called for an even bigger celebration than usual, and family members were flying in from across the country to attend. Our children were already there. Michael, our oldest, had flown in from Seattle with his wife and their twins. Sarah had driven up from Boston with her husband and their 3 kids, and our youngest, David, was coming solo from Chicago. They'd all arrived a day early to help prepare the cabin and set up for the anniversary party. As for my intuition, it's something that's been part of me for as long as I can remember. When Michael was 5, I suddenly felt the urge to check on him during a play date, only to find him about to drink what he thought was apple juice, but was actually cleaning solution in a misplaced cup. When Sarah was a teenager, I canceled her school trip at the last minute despite her protests the day before their bus had a serious accident. Small things, too, like knowing to bring an umbrella despite clear forecasts, or feeling the need to take a different route home, only to learn later there was a major accident on my usual path. Frank always called it my spooky radar. He'd joke about it with friends, but over the years, he'd learned to respect these feelings even if he didn't understand them. "Better safe than sorry," he'd say with a shrug when my hunches proved right. For this special reunion, we'd spent weeks preparing. I'd baked Harold and Betty's favorite cookies and packed them carefully. We had anniversary gifts wrapped beautifully in the trunk. Our suitcases were filled with enough clothes for the week, plus some extras in case of Vermont's unpredictable summer weather. The morning we left was perfect. Clear blue skies, mild temperature, just a light breeze. We loaded up our SUV, triple-checked that all appliances were turned off, and set the security system. Frank made sure the tires were properly inflated and the gas tank was full. Everything felt right as we pulled out of our driveway in Pennsylvania, ready for the 6-hour journey to the mountains of Vermont. The first few hours were lovely. We listened to our favorite oldies stations, sang along to Beatles and Fleetwood Mac, and chatted about how grown up our grandkids were getting. We stopped at our usual diner about halfway through the trip, enjoying coffee and homemade pie. Frank was particularly excited about seeing his brother Thomas, who was flying in from Arizona, and whom he hadn't seen in nearly 2 years. It wasn't until we were back on the road, specifically as we started to climb into the Green Mountains, that I felt the first whisper of unease. It was subtle at first, just a slight heaviness in my chest. I glanced at the GPS to make sure we were on the right track, checked that we hadn't forgotten anything important at home or at the diner. Everything seemed fine, so I tried to brush it off. The road grew narrower and more winding as we ascended. The views were spectacular, with dense forests occasionally opening to reveal breathtaking vistas of the valleys below. Usually, I loved this part of the journey, but today, something felt off. Frank was talking animatedly about the surprise video compilation the kids had put together for his parents, featuring messages from family members who couldn't attend in person. He was particularly touched that they'd managed to get a clip from his aunt in Australia, who was too elderly to travel. "Mom and Dad are going to be so moved," he said, eyes bright with excitement. 50 years, Chloe. Can you believe it? And we're not too far behind them. I nodded and smiled, trying to focus on his words rather than the growing discomfort in my gut. The unease continued to build as we drove deeper into the mountains. What had started as a vague feeling was now manifesting physically. My heart rate increased, my palms grew clammy, and a cold sweat broke out across my forehead. I opened the window slightly, hoping the fresh mountain air would help clear my head. "Are you feeling okay?" Frank asked, glancing over at me. "You look a little pale." "I'm not sure," I answered honestly. "I've got this strange feeling." "Car sickness. We could pull over for a bit." I shook my head. "No, it's not that. It's—" I trailed off, unsure how to explain. How do you describe a feeling that has no clear source, just a bad feeling? Frank nodded, familiar with my intuitive moments. "About the reunion, is something wrong with the kids?" I pulled out my phone and called Sarah, our most reliable child in terms of answering promptly. She picked up on the second ring, her voice cheerful amid background noise of children laughing and adults chatting. "Hey, Mom, where are you guys? We're all waiting." "Everything okay there?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Of course, Grandma and Grandpa just arrived. Uncle Thomas got in an hour ago. We're all just setting up and catching up. When do you think you'll get here?" "Another 2 hours or so," Frank called out so she could hear. "We're just starting the mountain pass now." After assuring Sarah we'd arrive soon, I hung up and checked the weather app on my phone. Clear conditions all along our route, no storms, no warnings. I even checked for traffic alerts. Nothing. "See, everything's fine," Frank said, patting my knee reassuringly. "Probably just pre-reunion jitters. That's a lot of family to handle all at once, even for us seasoned veterans." I tried to smile, but the feeling was intensifying. "Maybe you're right. Remember last year when you were convinced something terrible was going to happen, and it turned out Uncle Pete had just planned that surprise fireworks show?" Frank chuckled at the memory. "You nearly jumped out of your skin when they started going off." "This is different," I said quietly, looking out at the increasingly steep drop-offs on the side of the road. "This feels more urgent." Frank's smile faded slightly. "You're really worried, aren't you?" I nodded, embarrassed but unable to shake the feeling. "I know it sounds crazy." "No, not crazy," he assured me. "Just unexplainable. But honey, we've checked everything. The family is fine, the weather is clear, the car is running perfectly. What could possibly be wrong?" I didn't have an answer, and that made it worse. My mind flashed back to the one time I'd ignored my intuition when David was 17 and wanted to go on an overnight fishing trip with friends. I had a bad feeling, but dismissed it as overprotective parenting. They ended up stranded when their boat engine failed, spending a terrifying night adrift before the Coast Guard found them the next morning. I'd vowed never to ignore these feelings again, no matter how irrational they seemed. We were approaching the steepest part of the mountain pass now. The road narrowed further, with a sheer rock face on one side and a precipitous drop on the other, guarded only by a modest guardrail. In normal circumstances, I might have commented on the spectacular view or taken photos for our travel album. Today, all I felt was mounting dread. I noticed Frank slow the car as we rounded a particularly sharp curve. "Road's a bit wet here," he commented. "Must be from snowmelt or a spring above." I hadn't even noticed the slick surface, but now I saw it, a dark patch of moisture on the asphalt. My anxiety spiked higher. As we continued, I became aware of other things. The unusual quiet, no birdsong despite the dense forest around us. The way the trees seemed to bend slightly, though there was little wind. A glimpse of movement in the underbrush as small animals scurried away from the roadside. Were these the cues my subconscious was picking up? Or was my anxious mind simply looking for justification for this inexplicable fear? Frank turned on the radio, perhaps hoping to distract me. The signal was weak in the mountains, but he found a station playing soft rock. "Remember dancing to this at Sarah's wedding?" he asked clearly, trying to redirect my thoughts. But the feeling was becoming overwhelming. We were approaching a stretch of road that curved alongside the steepest part of the mountain, with nothing but that insufficient guardrail between us and the long drop below. Every cell in my body was screaming danger. As we approached that fateful curve, the sensation exploded from worry into full-blown terror. My hands began to tremble uncontrollably. I couldn't catch my breath. Cold sweat drenched my body, and I felt lightheaded, as though I might faint. This wasn't just anxiety. It was primal fear, the kind that triggers our most basic survival instincts. "Stop the car!" I said, my voice barely above a whisper at first, then with growing urgency. "Stop the car! Now!" Frank jumped at my sudden outburst, his hands tightening on the wheel as he glanced at me with alarm. "What? What's wrong?" "Pull over, Frank, right now!" I was nearly shouting, my voice shrill with panic. He began slowing the car, concern etched across his face. "Chloe, what's happening? Are you sick?" "Turn the car around," I insisted, clutching the dashboard with white-knuckled fingers. "We need to go back. Now." Frank pulled onto a small graveled area at the side of the road, putting the car in park, but keeping the engine running. He turned to face me fully, his expression a mix of worry and confusion. "Honey, talk to me. What's going on?" "We can't go this way," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "We need to turn around and take another route." "Another route, but this is the only direct way to the cabin," he said reasonably. "Going around would add hours to our trip. Everyone's waiting for us." "I don't care," I replied, the intensity of my feeling making me shake. "We cannot go forward on this road." Frank's brow furrowed. "But why is it something specific? Did you see something I missed?" I wanted to give him a logical explanation, something that would make sense to his practical mind. But I had nothing concrete to offer. "I just know," I said, hearing how inadequate that sounded. "I've never felt anything this strongly before, Frank. Please, trust me on this." He looked out the windshield at the road ahead, then back at me. I could see the internal struggle playing out on his face. The practical part of him wanting evidence, reason, something tangible to justify such a drastic action. But 43 years of marriage had also taught him to respect the inexplicable bond we shared. "You're really serious about this?" he said finally. It wasn't a question. "Dead serious," I replied, the unfortunate choice of words sending another chill through me. "Please, Frank, just trust me." He took a deep breath, looked once more at the road ahead, then nodded. "Okay, if you feel this strongly, we'll find another way." The relief that flooded through me was almost painful in its intensity. "Thank you," I whispered, reaching over to squeeze his hand. Executing a U-turn on the narrow mountain road required skill and patience. Frank waited until he was certain no other cars were coming in either direction, then carefully maneuvered our SUV around. Every second felt like an eternity, my anxiety not diminishing, until we were headed back the way we'd come. Once we were moving in the opposite direction, I felt some of the tension drain from my body, though the sense of dread lingered. We drove in silence for several minutes, descending from the highest part of the pass, before Frank spoke again. "I've never seen you like that before," he said quietly. Not even when you had that feeling about David's fishing trip. I've never felt anything like it before, I admitted, wiping cold sweat from my forehead. It was overwhelming, like every alarm in my body was going off at once. Frank nodded thoughtfully. What do you think it was? The road-conditioned wildlife. Another driver. I shook my head. I don't know. I just knew we couldn't be on that stretch of road. After descending for about 20 minutes, we found a wider area to pull over. Frank took out his phone and pulled up a map application. Okay, let's figure this out. We need to get to the cabin, but avoiding that mountain pass. He studied the screen for a few minutes, tracing potential routes with his finger. We could go north and around through Hampton, then cut back east. It'll add about 3 hours to our trip, but it's doable. I nodded, still feeling shaky, but immensely grateful for his understanding. I'll call Sarah and let them know we'll be late. As I dialed, Frank reached over and took my free hand. Hey, he said gently. It's okay. Better safe than sorry, right? That's always been our motto with your feelings. Sarah was disappointed but understanding when I explained we needed to take an alternate route. Everything okay with the car? She asked. The car's fine, I assured her, not wanting to try to explain my inexplicable panic. We just decided to take the scenic route. We'll be there for dinner just a few hours late. As we set off on our detour, the heavy feeling of dread gradually began to lift. By the time we were on the northern route, about an hour from the original road, I felt almost normal again, though exhausted from the intensity of the experience. Feeling better? Frank asked, noticing my more relaxed posture. Much, I said, offering him a genuine smile. Thank you for listening to me. He squeezed my hand. Always, Chloe, always. We finally arrived at the family cabin just after 7 in the evening, nearly 3 hours later than planned. The large, rustic structure was alive with light and sound cars parked all along the circular driveway and spilling onto the grass. As Frank pulled our SUV in behind a row of vehicles, I could see curious faces peering out of windows, wondering who the latecomers were. Sarah was the first to greet us, rushing out onto the porch with her youngest daughter in tow. Finally, she exclaimed, helping us with our bags. We were starting to wonder if you'd gotten lost on your scenic route. Sorry for the delay, Frank said, giving her a hug. The detour took longer than we expected. Inside the cabin was buzzing with activity and conversation. Family members from all generations were scattered throughout the spacious main room and adjoining kitchen. Harold and Betty, the guests of honor, sat regally in matching armchairs near the stone fireplace, accepting greetings and well wishes from a rotating cast of relatives. When they spotted us, their faces lit up. There they are, Harold called out, his voice still strong despite his advancing years. We were about to send out a search party. After hugs and greetings were exchanged all around, we settled in to join the celebration already in progress. Someone handed us plates of food, and conversations flowed naturally as we caught up with relatives we hadn't seen in months or years. The tension of our journey gradually faded as we were enveloped in the warmth of family. It was about an hour after our arrival when everything changed. Michael's wife, Jennifer, was checking her phone when she suddenly gasped. "Oh my God!" she said, her face paling as she looked at the screen. "There's been a landslide on Route 108. The room didn't fall silent all at once. Rather, the news rippled outward from Jennifer like a stone dropped in a pond, conversations stopping in concentric circles as more people became aware. When? Frank asked, his voice tight. Jennifer looked at the timestamp on the news alert. About 4:30. They're saying it's massive. The whole side of the mountain just came down across the road. 4:30. Almost exactly when we would have been on that very stretch if we hadn't turned around. Frank's eyes met mine across the room, his face draining of color as the realization hit him. I felt a cold wave wash over me, my intuition now horribly validated. Thomas Frank's brother had pulled out his tablet and was pulling up a local news website. "They've got helicopter footage," he said, his voice hushed. As family members gathered around, he propped the tablet on the coffee table so everyone could see. The aerial view showed utter devastation. What had been a mountain road was now buried under tons of rock earth and uprooted trees. The landslide had taken out nearly a quarter-mile of road guardrail and all leaving nothing but a raw wound on the mountainside that plunged straight down into the valley below. "Are there casualties?" someone asked. Thomas scrolled through the article, his expression grim. "3 cars confirmed caught in it. They're still searching for survivors, but—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. The footage made it clear that survival would have been virtually impossible. "That's the road you two would have been on," Sarah said slowly, looking from the tablet to us. "If you'd come the normal way." Frank's voice was barely audible. "That's exactly where we would have been, at exactly that time." A hush fell over the gathering as the implications sank in. Harold reached for Betty's hand, holding it tight as tears welled in her eyes. "How did you know?" Michael asked me directly. "Mom, how could you possibly have known?" All eyes turned to me, and I felt the weight of their questioning gazes. How could I explain something I didn't understand myself? I just felt it. I said simply, a feeling of danger so strong I couldn't ignore it. Frank crossed the room to stand beside me, putting his arm around my shoulders. "She saved our lives today," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I didn't want to turn around. There was no logical reason to. But she insisted, and thank God I listened." The reunion took on a surreal quality after that. The celebration continued, but with an undercurrent of shocked gratitude. Phone calls and text messages began pouring in from friends and extended family who had heard about the landslide and knew our usual route would have taken us right through it. Later that night, a local news crew showed up at the cabin, having heard about our near miss from a first responder who was a friend of Thomas. The reporter, a young woman with solemn eyes, interviewed us briefly on the porch. "So, you had no warning, no indication of danger ahead?" she asked. "Just a feeling." I nodded, uncomfortable with the spotlight, but wanting to be truthful. Sometimes our instincts know things before our conscious minds do. I can't explain it beyond that. As the evening news spread the story of our inexplicable escape, more people began arriving at the cabin. Travelers who had also avoided disaster by taking alternate routes. A geology professor from a nearby university who explained that the landslide had been caused by unseen water erosion beneath the surface, weakening the entire slope. "There were no visible signs," he confirmed. "No way anyone could have predicted it using conventional methods. We'll be studying this event for years to try to develop better early warning systems." That night, as Frank and I finally retired to our room, the emotional weight of the day caught up with me. I sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by what might have been. Frank sat beside me and took my hands in his. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "For what?" "For hesitating. For questioning you when you were so certain." His eyes were moist as he looked at me. "If I hadn't listened." I put my finger to his lips. "But you did listen. That's what matters." He pulled me into a tight embrace, and we held each other for a long time, grateful for the gift of continued life, acutely aware of how different this night could have ended. As we drifted off to sleep, I could hear the murmur of voices from the main room, where family members were still gathering, still processing, still celebrating not just Harold and Betty's 50 years, but the miracle that had kept our family intact today. The days following the landslide brought a cascade of developments, each adding new layers to our experience. The tragedy's full scope emerged gradually through news reports and first-hand accounts. 7 people had lost their lives, with 2 more still missing and presumed dead. The youngest victim was just 4 years old, part of a family traveling to a summer camping trip. Our family reunion, meant to be a celebration of Harold and Betty's enduring love, transformed into something more complex. Joy and gratitude mingled with somber awareness of others' loss. Frank's parents, deeply affected by how close they had come to losing their son, spent hours sitting quietly with us, often reaching out just to touch our hands or arms, as if reassuring themselves we were really there. Each morning, I woke from nightmares of falling, of being buried alive beneath tons of earth and rock. In these dreams, I was always aware that I had felt the warning, but had failed to act in time. I'd wake gasping for breath, Frank instantly alert beside me, holding me until the terror subsided. "It's okay," he'd whisper. "We're safe. You saved us." But had I? Or was it just incredible luck? These questions haunted me as reports of the victims' identities were released. A young couple from Boston, newly married, a retired schoolteacher traveling alone, a family of 4 now reduced to a sole surviving father who had been following in a separate car and witnessed the mountain collapse on his wife and children. The weight of survivors' guilt pressed heavily. Why had I been given this warning when others had not? What made our lives more deserving of salvation? Frank, for his part, had become hyper-vigilant about my every reaction. "How are you feeling about this route?" he'd ask before we'd drive anywhere. "Any bad vibes about this restaurant? Is it okay if we sit here?" His constant checking while coming from a place of love began to feel suffocating. "I can't predict every danger, Frank," I finally told him after he asked if I had any feelings about him taking a walk around the property. "It doesn't work that way. What happened was extraordinary, not the norm." Media interest in our story grew rapidly. Requests for interviews came from national news networks, talk shows, even a documentary filmmaker interested in stories of premonition. Most we declined, uncomfortable with being portrayed as special or gifted when so many others were grieving. Not everyone was supportive of our account. Online commenters suggested we had made up the story for attention, or that we had actually seen warning signs we were now claiming to have felt. Some labeled it a hoax, others attributed it to divine intervention. A small but vocal group even accused us of having insider knowledge about the unstable slope, as if we had somehow engineered the tragedy and escaped it ourselves. These accusations stung, but not as much as meeting Jack Thornton, the father who had watched helplessly as his family perished. He had sought us out driving to the cabin after seeing our brief news interview. "I need to understand," he said, his eyes hollow with grief as we sat with him on the porch. "How did you know? Could I have known too?" I had no answers that could ease his pain, no explanation that wouldn't sound like I was suggesting he should have somehow sensed the danger his family was in. In the end, we simply sat with him in silence, bearing witness to his loss, offering what little comfort our presence could provide. Meanwhile, our extended family reacted to our experience in widely varying ways. Some cousins now looked at me with something approaching reverence, as if I possessed supernatural powers. Others avoided the topic entirely, clearly uncomfortable with something that defied rational explanation. A few asked if I could check in on their futures or warn them about potential dangers in their lives. "I'm not psychic," I had to explain repeatedly. "I can't see the future or read minds. It was just an intense feeling in that specific moment." The children, especially the younger ones, seemed the most accepting. They incorporated the story into their play, taking turns being Grandma Chloe, who saves everyone from danger. I found this simultaneously touching and disturbing, not wanting them to believe that someone would always magically know when trouble was coming. By the 5th day of the reunion, the constant attention and questions had become overwhelming. Frank and I decided to take a day to ourselves, driving to a small town about 30 miles from the cabin. There, in a quiet cafe, we met Dr. Eleanor Wright, a scientist who specialized in studying intuitive decision-making. She had reached out after hearing our story not to sensationalize it, but to understand it better. Over coffee, she explained her research in a way that finally began to make sense of my experience. The human brain processes millions of data points subconsciously, she told us. Things we see, hear, feel, smell, all without conscious awareness. Sometimes, this subconscious processing recognizes patterns or dangers that our conscious mind hasn't yet pieced together. So you're saying Chloe might have noticed subtle signs, but there weren't any? Frank objected. The geologist confirmed that. Dr. Wright nodded thoughtfully. No obvious signs, perhaps, but maybe microtremors too small to consciously detect. Changes in wildlife behavior, subtle shifts in air pressure or sound quality due to the unstable slope. Your conscious mind didn't register these things, but your subconscious might have put them together into a warning. This explanation offered a lifeline between the rational world Frank inhabited and the intuitive one I had experienced. Not supernatural, but natural, in a complex way that science was only beginning to understand. Your experience isn't as uncommon as you might think, Dr. Wright continued. I've documented hundreds of cases where people acted on intuitive feelings that later proved to be life-saving. The challenge is that we only tend to notice and remember the hits, not the false alarms. Her words helped ease some of my confusion, though the weight of the tragedy remained. Before we left, she asked if I would be willing to participate in her research, not as a subject to be studied, but as a collaborator in understanding these intuitive processes better. If it could help prevent future tragedies, I said, then yes. The conversation with Dr. Wright marked a turning point in how I processed the experience. Rather than feeling bewildered or burdened by what had happened, I began to see a way forward, a purpose that might emerge from the tragedy. After much discussion with Frank, I decided to speak publicly about trusting intuition, not as something mystical, but as a natural human capacity that deserves respect. Our first opportunity came when the town nearest to the landslide held a memorial service for the victims 2 weeks after the disaster. The organizers asked if I would share our experience as part of the healing process for the community. Standing at the podium facing a sea of faces marked by grief and curiosity, I felt terrified. Public speaking had never been my forte, but the importance of the message gave me courage. I don't have special powers, I began, my voice trembling slightly. What happened to me that day was simply an extreme version of something we all experience. That feeling we sometimes get when something isn't right, even when we can't explain why. Throughout human history, these feelings have protected us. They're part of our evolutionary heritage, not supernatural gifts. I went on to explain Dr. Wright's research, how our brains constantly process information below the threshold of conscious awareness. How intuition isn't magic, but pattern recognition happening too quickly or subtly for our conscious mind to track. I believe we all have this capacity, I concluded. But in our busy, distracted, logic-focused world, many of us have learned to ignore these feelings, to dismiss them as irrational or silly. My message today is simple. Listen. Pay attention to those feelings, especially the strong ones. They might just save your life. The response was overwhelming. People lined up afterward to share their own stories of intuitive moments. A woman who canceled a flight that later crashed. A man who inexplicably checked his sleeping child and found them not breathing, allowing for a quick medical intervention that saved their life. Dozens of stories of close calls and gut feelings that had proven accurate. Following this initial speech, Frank and I were invited to meet with a psychologist specializing in intuitive decision-making. Dr. Sandra Mendelsohn had devoted her career to understanding the science behind such experiences. In her comfortable office lined with neuroscience textbooks, she explained that what I had experienced had physiological components that could be measured and studied. The body often knows before the conscious mind does, she explained. Heart rate variability changes, skin conductance shifts, subtle alterations in brainwave patterns. These physical responses can occur before we're consciously aware of a threat. Frank Ever, the practical one, was particularly interested in this scientific perspective. So, it's not really mysterious at all, he said. Just the body and unconscious mind putting things together faster than conscious thought. Exactly, Dr. Mendelsohn confirmed. Though that doesn't make it any less remarkable or valuable. Armed with this understanding, we began researching other documented cases of life-saving premonitions. The literature was vast, spanning cultures and centuries. In many cases, the people involved described physical sensations identical to what I had experienced: racing heart-cold sweat, overwhelming dread. This commonality across time and culture suggested something fundamental about human perception. Frank, to my surprise, became an even more passionate advocate than I did. The skeptic transformed into the believer, though his belief was now grounded in science rather than the supernatural. I've always trusted logic and evidence, he explained when I remarked on this change. Now I understand that intuition isn't the opposite of reason. It's just reason operating at a different level. Together, we started a support group for the families affected by the landslide. In those meetings, we focused not on my experience specifically, but on the process of healing after trauma and loss. Through these connections, we met geologists who were studying the disaster, hoping to identify warning signs that might prevent similar tragedies in the future. The mountain was speaking, one geologist told us. We just don't yet have the vocabulary to understand what it was saying, but maybe the human body and brain can pick up signals that our instruments miss. This perspective led to collaboration with researchers developing an early warning system for the mountain roads. They were particularly interested in documenting environmental cues that might have been present before the slide, things that my subconscious might have detected. Did I notice the unusual stillness of birds, changes in air pressure, subtle vibrations? I couldn't consciously recall such details, but working with the research team helped me understand that my intuition might have been processing exactly these types of signals. As our involvement with these various groups deepened, I found myself invited to speak at a local high school about trusting instincts. Standing before a room full of teenagers, I emphasized that intuition wasn't about fear or paranoia. It's about listening to the quieter voices inside you, I explained. Not just about danger, but about all kinds of knowing. Which path feels right? Which relationships nurture you? Which choices resonate with your deepest self? Not everyone embraced our message. At a community forum on the landslide, one man stood up during the question period, his face flushed with anger. "This is all hindsight and coincidence," he declared. "You're giving people false hope that they can somehow predict disasters. It's irresponsible." The accusation stung, but Frank stepped forward before I could respond. "We've never claimed this is about prediction," he said calmly. "It's about listening to all the ways we know the world, not just the analytical ones. And if paying attention to those feelings makes even one person pause in a potentially dangerous situation, isn't that worth exploring?" That night, Frank and I had our most profound conversation about how the experience had changed us. Sitting on the porch of our home, watching fireflies rise from the summer grass, we reflected on the months since the landslide. "I used to think life was about planning," Frank said quietly. "About controlling variables and making smart decisions based on clear evidence. Now I understand there's a whole other dimension to how we know things. And I always thought my feelings were just personal, subjective," I replied. "Now I see they can be a kind of intelligence picking up on real patterns in the world." We talked about finding balance going forward. How to respect intuitive warnings without becoming paranoid or fearful. How to stay open to these deeper ways of knowing without abandoning critical thinking. "I think it's like having two navigation systems," Frank suggested. Logic is like following a map step by step. Intuition is like having a compass that points toward truth, even when you can't see the path clearly. As we sat there hand in hand, I felt a sense of peace settling over me for the first time since that terrible day on the mountain road. We had survived not just physically, but emotionally. We had found meaning in the inexplicable and purpose in the random. Most importantly, we had found a way to honor those who were lost by sharing what we had learned from our narrow escape. We can't control everything, I said softly, leaning against his shoulder. But maybe we can learn to listen better to the world around us and to ourselves. Frank nodded, squeezing my hand. And to each other, he added. That's what saved us in the end. I listened to you even when it didn't make logical sense to do so. As night deepened around us, I knew that whatever came next, we would face it together, with both our minds and our hearts fully engaged, alert to all the ways wisdom comes to us if we're willing to listen. 1 year after the landslide, Frank and I returned to the site for the official memorial service. The road had been rebuilt with extensive safety improvements, including advanced monitoring systems for slope stability, reinforced retaining walls, and a slightly altered route that moved traffic further from the most vulnerable sections of the mountainside. Standing at the newly constructed memorial overlook, I was struck by the dual nature of the place. On one hand, it was a site of devastating loss, where lives had been cut short in a matter of seconds. On the other, it was beautiful, with sweeping views of forested valleys and distant peaks, a testament to nature's enduring majesty, despite its occasional destructive power. The memorial itself was simple, but powerful, a series of stone markers bearing the names of those lost arranged in a semicircle facing the valley. Smaller stones placed by family members and friends surrounded each marker, creating a growing constellation of remembrance. Frank stood beside me, his arm around my waist, steady and supportive as always. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. I nodded. Different than I expected. I thought I'd feel more dread coming back here, but it's more peaceful. He understood, as he always did these days. Our relationship had deepened in ways neither of us could have anticipated before the landslide. The experience had stripped away pretenses and insignificant disagreements, leaving a profound appreciation for each day we had together. "Life is so fragile," he said, echoing my thoughts. "And so precious." The ceremony brought together survivors, victims' families, first responders, and community members. Speeches were given, poems read, songs sung. Throughout it all, there was an underlying current of resilience, a collective determination to honor the dead by living more fully and consciously. When it was my turn to speak, I kept my words simple. A year ago, my intuition saved our lives on this road. I've spent the months since trying to understand that experience, not as something that makes me special, but as something that connects me to our shared human capacity for knowing in different ways. The greatest tribute we can pay to those who were lost is to live with heightened awareness, to be fully present in each moment, and to listen to all the ways our bodies and minds try to keep us safe. After the ceremony, several people approached us, including Jack Thornton, the man who had lost his wife and children. In the years since the tragedy, he had founded a nonprofit organization dedicated to improving road safety in mountain regions. "Your story helped me," he said, taking my hands in his. "Not at first. At first, it just made me angry. Why you, and not my family? But eventually, I realized that asking why leads nowhere. What matters is, what now? How do we prevent this from happening again?" His words touched me deeply. This man who had lost everything had found a way to channel his grief into purpose. If he could move forward, how could I do any less? Several of the researchers we'd worked with over the past year were also present, including Dr. Wright, who had continued her studies on intuitive decision-making, now with a specific focus on natural disaster scenarios. "We've made significant progress," she told us excitedly. "By combining traditional monitoring systems with reports of intuitive feelings from local residents, we're developing a more comprehensive early warning network. Your experience was the catalyst." This integration of scientific measurement with human perception represented exactly the balance Frank and I had come to value in our own lives. We'd learned to respect his logical, methodical approach, and my more intuitive one, seeing them as complementary rather than contradictory. In our day-to-day lives, this balance manifested in practical ways. When making decisions, we'd consider both the factual evidence and our gut reactions. Sometimes they aligned perfectly, other times they diverged, requiring deeper exploration. But we no longer dismissed either approach outright. This new respect for intuition had spread to our children as well. Michael, our most skeptical child, had begun to pay more attention to his own intuitive nudges, especially regarding his children's safety. Sarah had incorporated mindfulness practices into her daily routine, creating space to notice subtle feelings that might otherwise be overlooked. David, always the most similar to me in temperament, had become particularly interested in the scientific research on intuition, even changing his career path to study psychology. As the memorial service concluded and people began to disperse, Frank and I lingered watching the afternoon light play across the valley below. A young woman approached us, introducing herself as Teresa, a geology student working with the team monitoring the rebuilt road. "Your story inspired me," she told us. "Not just the intuition part, but how you trusted each other when it mattered most. My research focuses on how communities can develop collective awareness of environmental changes. Would you be willing to speak to our research group sometime?" We agreed, readily touched that our experience continued to ripple outward in positive ways. This was how we had found healing over the past year, by sharing our story not as something miraculous or unique, but as a reminder of capacities we all possess. On our drive home, taking the new, safer route through the mountains, Frank and I reflected on how far we had come since that fateful day. "Remember how overprotective I became right after?" Frank chuckled. "Asking you about your feelings every 5 minutes." I smiled at the memory. And how I kept having those nightmares, wondering why I deserved to be saved when others weren't. "We've found a better balance now," he observed, "not living in fear, but staying aware." That balance had become our philosophy. We had learned to navigate between excessive caution and reckless disregard, between obsessing over potential dangers and ignoring warning signs. In the process, we had discovered a richer way of moving through the world, attuned to both external realities and internal wisdom. This lesson had proved valuable beyond safety concerns. Last month, we had helped our neighbors avoid a financial scam by sharing our approach to decision-making. When something feels off, we told them, pay attention to that feeling, even if you can't immediately identify its source. Their gratitude when the scheme was later exposed reinforced the value of what we had learned. We had also reconnected with several families we met in the aftermath of the landslide. The Mortons, who had narrowly avoided the disaster by taking a wrong turn, had become close friends. The Jacksons, who lost their grandfather in the tragedy, had found some peace through the support group we helped establish. These relationships formed a community of understanding that transcended the usual social connections. As we neared home, Frank reached over and took my hand. "Our next family reunion is coming up in 2 months," he said. "The first one since that day." I nodded, feeling a mix of anticipation and poignancy. "It will be different this time, more meaningful in some ways." "Harold and Betty are so excited to have everyone together again," Frank continued. "Dad says after what happened last year, he's never taking a single gathering for granted again." That perspective had become central to our lives as well. Each family dinner, each phone call with our children, each quiet evening on the porch with Frank had taken on new significance. The landslide had taught us the preciousness of ordinary moments, the gift of continued life that we had so nearly lost. As we pulled into our driveway, I thought about what I had learned about the balance between logic and intuition. Both were valuable ways of knowing the world, like different languages expressing the same underlying reality. The wisdom lay not in choosing one over the other, but in learning to be fluent in both. "You know what I realized," I said to Frank as we carried our bags inside. "The greatest act of courage that day wasn't facing some external danger. It was you trusting me enough to act without understanding why, and me trusting myself enough to speak up when I couldn't explain what I was feeling." Frank nodded, setting down his bag to pull me into an embrace. "Sometimes the hardest thing is honoring what we know deep down, even when we can't prove it or explain it to others." That night, as we settled into our familiar routines, I felt profound gratitude for this second chance at life and for the deeper understanding we had gained through near tragedy. We had learned that safety doesn't come from controlling every variable or predicting every outcome, but from staying alert and responsive to the world in all the ways we can know it. Have you ever had a moment when you trusted your intuition against all logic and it turned out to be right? Or a time when you wished you had listened to that little voice inside warning you about something? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, please subscribe, and share it with someone who might need a reminder to trust their own inner knowing. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you always find the courage to honor both your logical mind and your intuitive wisdom.